In that debate between Javed Akhtar and Mufti Shamail, a lot of critical arguments were just left hanging, completely unexamined. So today, we're stepping in. Think of this as the rigorous, academic cross-examination that was missing. We're here to analyze the logic, not the personalities.
Okay, let's dive right in with this. Javed Akhtar landed a really powerful historical point here. Gods, it seems, can be mortal. They're often tied to the civilizations that dream them up. I mean, think about it. Ra, Osiris, Zeus, Apollo. History is basically a graveyard for gods whose worshippers, their projectors, just disappeared. This immediately puts the pressure on Shamail to prove why his god is any different from the countless others that have just faded into myth. Now, before we even touch the big philosophical claims, we have to look at the procedural failures of the argument. Because from a purely academic standpoint, this is where the entire structure starts to fall apart. An argument that breaks its own rules is invalid before it even begins. And this, right here, is just fascinating. You see the immediate contradiction. Shamail sets the terms of engagement very clearly. No empirical evidence and no scripture. But what does he do? In his very first move, he demands empirical proof. Show me something. And then later, he brings in the Quranic idea of a divine test. You just can't set the rules and then be the first one to break them. How can anyone trust the logic of your argument if you won't even abide by your own framework?
So let's be clear, this isn't some minor slip-up. In a formal, logical debate, violating your own established rules is a fatal error. It means the entire case is built on shaky, inconsistent ground. The argument basically defeats itself.
All right, let's move on to Shamail's central claim, this idea about the necessity of a creator. And let's see how it's built, or maybe more accurately, how it completely falls apart under real logical scrutiny. This is supposed to be his main pillar, so let's look at it closely.
To be as fair as possible, we'll present the strongest version of his argument. In philosophy, we call this steel manning. The idea, known as the argument from contingency, goes like this. Since everything we see depends on something else for its existence, the entire universe must also depend on something for its existence, which would be a necessary, uncaused creator.
But here is where the logic completely fails. To see the mistake, you just have to ask a very simple question about parts and wholes. And the answer, of course, is no. You can build an absolutely enormous wall out of tiny little bricks.
And this little question brilliantly exposes a classic textbook logical error. It's called the fallacy of composition. It's a totally invalid leap in reasoning to just assume that a whole system must have the same properties as its individual parts.
So, just because every brick is contingent, that doesn't mean the wall is. And just because every event inside the universe has a cause, it does not logically follow that the universe as a whole needs an external one. This is a fundamental category error. He's treating the universe as if it's just another object in the universe, and that single mistake completely undermines his entire conclusion.
Okay, next up, let's talk about the attempt to dismiss one of the oldest and most powerful challenges to theism, the problem of evil and suffering in our world.
Shamail's claim is that the existence of just immense suffering, from children with cancer to massive natural disasters, is really just an emotional objection to God, not a logical one. Now, this is a pretty common debate tactic, but it fundamentally misrepresents what the issue actually is. The academic reality is in fact the exact opposite. This is not just some emotional cry for help, it's a deep intellectual problem that the world's greatest thinkers have been wrestling with for thousands of years. To just dismiss it as emotional is to ignore centuries of serious philosophical and theological work. In fact, there's a whole field of study called theodicy that is dedicated exclusively to grappling with this very challenge. The very existence of this field is proof that the problem of evil is, at its core, a problem of logic.
So the crucial point is this: the challenge isn't about feelings, it's about trying to make these propositions fit together. If a being is all good, it would have the motivation to stop suffering. If it's all powerful, it would have the ability. The existence of suffering doesn't just create some tension, it presents a direct logical contradiction to the classical definition of an all-good, all-powerful God.
All right, so we've spent some time taking apart these arguments. Now let's move from refutation to actually providing the counter-evidence. Let's build the academic case for a universe that simply doesn't require a supernatural creator.
And to do this, we can apply a core principle of both science and philosophy. You've probably heard of it. It's called Occam's razor. And it says, simply put, don't add extra stuff you don't need. The simplest explanation is usually the best one.
As the leading philosopher of religion Graham Oppy argues, when we're trying to explain reality, we basically have two competing models. Theism gives us two fundamental things: God plus the universe. Naturalism, on the other hand, just gives us one: the universe itself. So, from the perspective of Occam's razor, the question is pretty straightforward, isn't it? Naturalism is the more elegant, the more parsimonious theory. It only requires one foundational entity, not two. The burden of proof, then, has to fall on the person proposing the more complex theory. If the universe can be explained as a self-sufficient reality, then adding this extra, undefined, and incredibly complex entity called God is just logically unnecessary.
So, what should you really take away from all this? What's the final picture that we see when we apply some actual academic rigor to these arguments? What we've seen is a systematic breakdown of reasoning at every single stage. It started with a procedural failure, breaking the debate's own rules. It continued with a core logical fallacy right in the main argument, and it wrapped up with a serious misrepresentation of a major academic field.
And maybe this all brings us to a final, much more profound question. Is the entire debate just trapped in the wrong category? By arguing over God as a static person, a noun, are we missing the whole point? What if the ultimate reality isn't a who, but a what? Not some external creator, but the very quality of creation itself, a dynamic, living verb we simply call existence.